Good morning. This is Tanisha Williams with the Florida Sheriff's Association, and on behalf of our Executive Director, Steve Casey, and our President, Sheriff Mark Hunter, we'd like to welcome you to our ethics webinar. Before we get started, we would like to remind you of a few housekeeping tips. During the webinar, please do not put the call on hold, and please remember that we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Matt Dunnigan, who will further explain our webinar and introduce our presenter for today.
Good morning, everybody. This is the first of 4 hours for our ethics webinar. As all of you are well aware of, because you do this now every year, the legislature several years ago passed an ethics reform package requiring all elected officials to receive at a minimum 4 hours of ethics training. If you attend this hour and the next 3 hours, you will fulfill that requirement. For today, this is the first hour, and it will be conducted by the Florida Sheriff's Association General Counsel Wayne Evans. Wayne will walk you through this first hour. After this, every Tuesday at 10 a.m., we will be hosting another hour of this 4-hour training. Just a reminder to everybody as well, this will also be posted online for sheriffs and their staffs to view, and that will be posted on our Sheriff's Only webpage this first hour and then each of the following 3 after this. So now it's my honor to turn it over to our General Counsel, Wayne Evans, for our first hour of ethics training. Wayne?
Thank you, Matt, and good morning, everyone. These topics of public records and ethics are important. You know, the legislature singled them out as something that you all need to know, and you need 4 hours of training every year. I can tell you from a practical standpoint that public records issues are important to you, because if there's a violation of the public records law, it's going to cost your agency money. If there's a violation of the ethics code, it could cost you votes or an election, because as you all can well imagine, ethics complaints are front page news. So we really need to spend some time going over these and getting y'all refreshed about what these laws provide and what you need to know, hopefully to keep yourself and to keep the agency out of trouble. You know, with regard to the public records laws, you've got a custodian who would be pretty knowledgeable about what's a public record and what's not, what are the exemptions and the like. But with ethics, you know, you can't rely upon somebody within the agency to know what's a gift and what you can accept and what you can't accept, what needs to be reported and the like. That's something that you need to be particularly knowledgeable about, and that's why, you know, we're going to spend an hour today and an hour next week going over the ethics code to familiarize you all with those provisions and particularly instances that may arise that you all need to know about in order to ensure that you're not putting yourself in harm's way with regard to a potential ethics complaint, or if there is a complaint, that we can defend it. And, you know, unfortunately, the reality of it is that when there's a complaint, it's front page news, and if ultimately we prevail in it, you know, it's somewhere towards the back of the newspaper. But better to prevail than not, and an ethics violation is good news for your political opponents. So, again, all the more reason to go over these ethics code provisions and get y'all familiar with what they provide. A couple of things I do want to mention to you. You know, most of y'all are aware that we handle hotlines on a variety of different topics. I cover most of them, public records being a large source of these. But, you know, occasionally I'll get a call from a sheriff about an ethics issue, and I welcome those calls, and it's really beneficial for y'all if in doubt about an issue, whether, you know, it's a gift, whether to report it or not, whether it's a business venture with you or a member of the agency, there's the potential for a conflict. You know, go ahead and give me a ring and let's talk about it, and let's make sure that you've got some good advice, you know, before you know, you accept that gift or before, you know, you engage into that particular business venture. So we don't have to be concerned about something that you've done that may result in a complaint and we may not be able to defend. You know, I do handle ethics complaints for the sheriffs. Those that are with the Florida Sheriff's Risk Management Fund are covered by the fund if there's a complaint. And I've typically represented sheriffs over the years with regard to complaints before the Ethics Commission, and they come in a variety of different types of complaints. Many of them deal with gifts, which is why this hour we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about what's a gift and when is it required to be reported and what types of gifts you absolutely cannot accept and paying them down and the like. And then complaints have come in from misuse of agency resources, you know, taking an agency vehicle, you know, out of the state that may violate your policy, use of credit cards or purchasing cards and failure to follow your policy, purchases on the cards that exceed per diem and, you know, conflicting contractual relationships. So we've had a variety of these that have come in. And again, the best way to protect yourself, again, is to be familiar with the provisions of the Ethics Code. And if there's a question at all in your mind, then go ahead and give me a call. I also want to point out to you as well that the Ethics Commission will provide opinions. So sometimes I'll even recommend to a sheriff, well, I think it would be better for you before you do this to go ahead and get a written opinion from the Ethics Commission so that you've got that handy in the event that there is some question from a member of the public about whether or not what you're doing is a violation of the Ethics Code or not. And I found that the staff of the Ethics Commission have been very, very helpful and accommodating, either calling them informally and asking them about, well, have y'all looked at these issues before and what have you opined, or something specific to your particular situation. So with that, what we're going to talk about over the next couple of weeks, financial disclosures with which you're well familiar. Y'all have an annual form that you do. Gifts, and again, discussing, you know, what is a gift, from whom can you receive a gift, from whom are you prohibited from receiving gifts, what are the value amount of gifts, if you get a gift, how do you value it, reporting requirements, and the like. So that's going to be pretty much the focus of our presentation this morning. And next week, we're going to focus a lot on some of the other provisions, misuse of office, doing business with your agency, conflicting employment or contractual relationships. After you leave the office of sheriff, what are the restrictions in terms of, you know, interacting, you know, with the sheriff's office, and the nepotism law. And I get calls on this from time to time as well, and again, better to call before you make a decision to promote a relative in your agency that's going to be problematic for you. So those are the different types of issues in the Ethics Code that we're going to cover, and let's begin by talking briefly about financial disclosure statements. So y'all are familiar with Form 6. You completed this before, listing your financial interests, which are required for the disclosure. Form 6 is what you complete, and in that form, you're going to certify that you've had your ethics and public records training that, again, we're going to cover today and for the next several weeks. This financial disclosure statement, I'm going to mention this several times, you're required to do it. So you are a reporting individual, and we'll get to that in a minute, but just to reiterate who's a reporting individual, that's you. That's not a member of anybody else in your agency. It's not your financial director. It's not your major. It's not your chief deputy. Nobody on your command staff. You are the only one that's required to file this financial disclosure statement. And, you know, when you do this, and I'm sure you all have paid attention to, you know, all of your financial interests, just make sure that you've disclosed everything. I had a case once for a county commissioner years and years ago who came from a wealthy family, and she had ownership interests with the family and some real estate parcels out of state and neglected to disclose them, and that became problematic when there was a complaint, and ultimately she had to amend her financial disclosure statement, but that was a violation of the Ethics Code, which resulted in a fine being assessed by the commission. So be sure that you've exhausted all your interests, your financial interests when you're completing these, and if you acquire a new interest, then be sure that you've included that in your next statement. So that requires not a lot of explanation, but the quarterly reports with regard to gifts do require a little more discussion, particularly as it gets into what you're required to report and when you're required to do it. So this is Form 9, if memory serves me correctly. And y'all know that if you get a gift, you're required to report that on your quarterly report. And conversely, if you do not receive any gifts during a quarter, you're not required to file the report and say that you didn't receive any gifts. And again, you are the only one in your agency as a reporting individual who is required to file the quarterly report. So the gift laws principally apply to you. They don't apply to your chief deputy or your command staff. They don't apply to your director of purchasing. And there was a question about this several years ago when Sheriff Benton was president of the Florida Sheriff's Association, and there had been some changes in the ethics laws at that time, and there was a concern that the disclosure requirements may now apply to finance directors or your purchasing directors, and so we asked the Ethics Commission for an opinion on that, and we actually have a written response indicating that because of the specific nature of the office, as far as the sheriff being an independent constitutional office and the unique nature of that office, that the sheriff is the reporting individual, and again, nobody else within the agency. Okay. All right. So throughout this presentation this morning, I'm going to be referring to reporting individuals, and again, that would be you. That's the sheriff, again, not your chief deputy, not finance director. That's you, and you're the one required to file the two different forms, with regard to gifts, Form 9, and financial disclosure, Form 6. Now, we've talked about reporting individual, that's you, and we're going to talk about a couple of other individuals as well, or groups of folks, you might say, and I'm going to refer to lobbyists and vendors, and I'm going to begin with lobbyists. And when I talk about lobbyists, you need to get the traditional lobbyist, somebody in Tallahassee who walks the halls working legislation. You need to get that out of your mind, because that's not who is a lobbyist for the purposes of the Ethics Code. If you'll note the definition, anyone, who for compensation sought in the past 12 months to influence decision-making of a reporting individual, that's you, or your agency, or to encourage the passage, defeat, or modification of any proposal by the reporting individual or your agency. Well, in essence, this means somebody who is being employed as a vendor or a potential vendor for the specific purpose of getting you, say, to award a contract to that vendor. So if you had someone who was employed by like a communications vendor, somebody that handles, the cell phones, the radios for your agency, or it was a food vendor for your jail, or a medical provider for your jail, and there was someone who was employed by one of those vendors for the specific purpose of reaching out to public agencies, including sheriff's offices, for example, and basically soliciting business, that's really who we're talking about. That's a lobbyist for the purposes of the ethics code. And you need to keep that individual in mind, as well as the next term, vendor, because there are restrictions on gifts in terms of what you can accept and whether or not, you can take it and report it or not. And as we're going to see, with regard to certain gifts, you cannot accept gifts over a particular value from lobbyists and also from a vendor. And very simply, a vendor is somebody who's doing business with your sheriff's office. So if there's a contract between you and some business entity, that is a vendor, regardless of the amount. So again, you think about all the different businesses that do business with your agency. So if it's, again, communications and, they've got your cell phones, or you've got someone who's contracted to provide food services for the jail. Maybe you've got another outfit that's also doing some security work. Maybe they're handling that part of it, at the courthouse. You can go through the whole possibilities. You decide that you contract directly with an automobile dealership, locally, for some of your vehicles, weapons and ammunition. You go through the whole laundry list of all the different types of goods or services that are available to your agency. Essentially, if there's a contract, that business is a vendor. And if that's a vendor, someone who is affiliated with that business who gives you something of value, you need to pay attention to that, because as we're going to see, if it's over $100, you cannot accept it. That's a problem if you take it, and if it's over $100, because you're prohibited from accepting a gift with that value from a lobbyist or from a vendor. Okay, so in short, what are the gift laws? All right, well, if it's in excess of $100, as I said, it cannot be accepted from a lobbyist or a vendor. Now note, there are 90 days from receipt to reimburse in part or in full. So let's suppose, you go out to dinner with somebody and they've got a contract with your agency. Maybe they've got the food services contract, for the jail. And so they want to take you out to dinner. Okay, that's fine. That's not a problem. But you need to ask at the end of the dinner, how much was it? Particularly, if they're going to take you and your wife out, then, what you would normally pay for your wife and they pick up the tab, well, that's a gift. So you got to factor in not just the value of your meal, but the value of the meal for you and your wife, and that could easily exceed $100. So you want to ask that question, how much was our share of the meal? And to avoid a violation of the ethics code, you don't have to reimburse the vendor for the entire amount of your meal, but you do have to reimburse the vendor for an amount that gets it to 100 or less. So, that's the question that you need to ask, and you've got 90 days in order to get that done. And, that happens, and, I know it's true at sheriff's conferences and otherwise, you go out to dinner, with some of the vendors, and they're happy to do it, but if you're taking your wife, you want to ask that question, is this more than 100? Because if it is, I need to write you a check, and I encourage you all to have a check written so that you've got a record, in case there's ever any question about, whether or not you were provided a gift, that violated the ethics code. So, again, just to sum up very quickly, there's nothing prohibited about you taking a gift from a vendor. The problem is if the value is more than $100. The same, with regard to a lobbyist. So if you know what the value is, then make sure that you get that vendor or that lobbyist a check that gets the value of it, 100 or less, and then you're good. There's nothing to report. And remember now, the reporting requirements really don't apply with regard to gifts concerning vendors or lobbyists, because you're prohibited from accepting a gift that's more than $100. So if you go out to dinner and it's you and your wife, and the total is, like $150 for the two of you, so you decide, okay, just to be safe, here's a check for $60, and that gets it down. There's nothing for you to report. And if you hadn't, you wouldn't be reporting that, you had a gift of $150 from a vendor or a lobbyist. You're not supposed to be doing it at all. So again, you just really need to pay attention to what's the relationship, if any, between this person with whom, you're out to dinner. Do they have a contract with the agency? Are they soliciting business from the agency? And if so, those gift restrictions may apply. So we know about vendors and lobbyists. So now what about somebody who doesn't have that business relationship with your agency, who isn't a lobbyist, who isn't a vendor? What about those gifts? Well, the $100 threshold is again the key here as well. So if you don't have a lobbyist, you don't have a vendor, a gift exceeding $100 has got to be reported. That's going to be on Form 9. That's your quarterly report. So that's what you're going to put on that particular form at the end of the quarter. And again, as in the case of the vendors or the lobbyists, if you don't want to have to report a gift, which would be available for the public to see, you can pay it down. And if you get it to 100 or less, then you don't have to report the gift. So we'll get into this in a bit, but the long and the short of it is $100 is really what you want to keep in mind. Vendors and lobbyists, anything over 100, you can't accept it. Anybody else, well, you can accept it, but you've got to report it if it's more than $100. And y'all may prefer, again, not to have to put this on Form 9, not to have to make the quarterly report. So to avoid that, find out how much is the meal and pay it down, or how much is the gift and pay it down, get it to 100 or less, and then you're fine. And make sure you've got a record of it in case it's ever challenged. And again, a check is a good way to do that. All right, so what gifts can be accepted? Well, you can get gifts from relatives, and I've got a definition for you in the next slide, and that's available on the PowerPoint and in statute, and it's a lot of relatives. Gifts on behalf of charities or the agency. So, Youth Ranches wants to do something nice for you, or somebody else, a local charity is appreciative of everything that's been done, and they want to give you something. That's not a prohibited gift. We talked about vendors or lobbyist gifts that don't exceed $100. Non-vendors, non-lobbyists, you got to report them if it's more than 100, but again, there's nothing that prohibits you from accepting a gift if it's not a vendor or if it's not a lobbyist. You just have to report it. Gifts from state, regional, or national organizations promoting professional development, governmental officials, such as the Florida Sheriff's Association. So talking about that for a minute, if at a conference there's a gift from the Sheriff's Association, the FSA staff will tell you whether or not this is a gift that needs to be reported. I don't think that that's been necessarily the case for the last few years. I do remember years ago that there would be a vendor who would have a gift to be given, like at a raffle or something like that, and it would be a pass-through. Essentially, the vendor would be paying for the gift, like a fishing trip, and it would be given out, by FSA staff, but nonetheless, it was the vendor's gift because the vendor was paying for it. So that would be a gift that would need to be reported, even though it may have been provided by FSA staff. But I will tell you that normally if there are gifts that are distributed at the conference, staff will tell you whether or not any of that needs to be reported, what the value is, and if there's ever a question, you should ask. Okay, you can read this list as well as I can, but you can see it's pretty broad in terms of who are your relatives, immediate family and son-in-law, daughter-in-law, brother-in-law, etc. So if there's a question about whether or not you have a gift from a relative, pull the statute, read it, and if it's not in this list, then it's a gift. It's a second or a third cousin. That's going to be a gift. So immediate family, no worries. But extended family, that's going to be a gift. Okay. There's a statute that defines a gift, basically anything accepted for a person's benefit directly or indirectly, for which or equal greater consideration is not given within 90 days of receipt. There are many different examples of gifts which we can discuss as, for instance, transportation, meaning you get a ride, you're going out of state, staying with some friends at their place in North Carolina, and you ride with them. That transportation, that's a gift because you're not taking your own car, so there's mileage there. That would be a gift that, would need to be divided based upon occupants in the vehicle. We'll talk about lodging, but let me say there is no best friend exception to the gift requirement. And let me repeat that. You've got relatives, but nothing that says that if you're up with your closest friends and they're the ones that have the retreat in the mountains in North Carolina and you're staying with them, that's got to be reported if the whole package is more than $100 because, again, there's nothing in the gift law that carves out an exception for your close friends. Parking, somebody picks up the tab, while, you're at the airport. They paid for your airfare. They paid for the parking as well. That's an issue too. Food or beverages, we've talked about that. But let me give you a really good example about something that you may not have considered that is a form of a gift. That's not the same as somebody buying you a meal. A few years ago, Sheriff was given a membership at a country club. He paid for it, but the country club encouraged certain local public officials to be members of this country club. So they gave them a discount in the dining room, like a 10% discount, because they wanted them to be seen. It was good for business for the country club for these local public officials to be seen, particularly, in the dining room. The sheriff, didn't use any of the other amenities. There was a limited package there. But over a period of about a year and a half, the sheriff and his wife ate often in the dining room, and they got a 10% discount on their meals. Ultimately, somebody dropped a dime with the Ethics Commission and made a complaint, and as it turns out, that 10% discount became a gift because it was discounted from what the public ordinarily would be obligated to pay. And over that period of about a year and a half, with the number of meals that the sheriff had at the country club, it was over $100, and it had not been reported. So you want to be thinking about that as well. It's not just somebody who goes out and buys you a meal. Are you being given some kind of an advantage that's not afforded to the public? And if so, what's the value for it? And in the case of this particular sheriff, it, again, was well over $100, and ultimately, that was an issue for the Ethics Commission. Dues, somebody picks up your dues for Rotary or some other, local service club. Same thing, fees, tickets, for any sports event, for any entertainment. Again, if it's over $100 in value, that's a gift that's got to be reported. Plants and flowers, you are reelected and somebody sends you this tremendous, flowering arrangement, okay, how much is that? You need to know, how much is that? If it's over 100, that's a gift. You can accept it for the agency and then it's not an issue. But if it's in your office and it's yours, then again, that's a gift that's got to be reported if it's more than $100. Hunting trips, green fees, country club memberships, all of that, clearly, again, 100 is the key. If it's more than 100, that's got to be reported. So, you go up to a hunting lodge and you're there for 4 days and you're staying in a hunting lodge, we're going to see the value of that a night is $44 a night, so you're there for 4 nights. That's 4 nights at $44. And if somebody's picking up the meals, then the value of the meals divided by how many there are of you, 6, then, and it's 300 for the meals, 6 into 300. So all of that, again, if it's for your benefit, that's a gift. If it's over $100, it's got to be reported. Legislature put this in to make sure that anything from a PAC goes towards campaign financing, and if it doesn't wind up in the campaign account, that's a problem because that's a prohibited gift. So you get something from a political action committee, then make sure it's going towards the campaign and goes in that account. All right, I touched on this so we can elaborate a little bit more on evaluating a gift. General rule is, what does it cost the donor? I mentioned with regard to lodging, if it's in a private residence, it's $44 a night. That's statutory. And if you're going on a trip, and again, it's to the hunting lodge, or you're up in North Carolina with the friends, you put it all together to determine what's the value of the trip. It's the transportation, it's the lodging at $44 a night, the meals, whatever else, and that combined is the value of the trip. Again, you can accept it unless it's a vendor or a lobbyist and it's over 100, and then that's a problem. So if it's friends, that's okay. You can accept it, but you have to report it. If you don't want to report it, you figure out what the value is and then give them a check for the amount that gets it to 100 or less. Transportation, the value of the gift is determined by comparable commercial conveyance. So had a call about a month or so ago about a sheriff who was provided some transportation on a plane, and it was, relating to the business of the agency, but again, the agency didn't pay for his transportation, somebody else did. So the question was, is that a gift? And the answer is yes, that is a gift. And how do you determine the value of the gift? Well, you would look at what the comparable commercial airfare would be, coach fare, for that same trip, if it's, like Tallahassee, to Lauderdale, then what is Delta charging, or United, or whoever is flying that particular route? And if I were you, I would make sure that you retain what information you discern when you're checking those rates. So you've got it in a file somewhere in case it's ever questioned, and you report, for example, that you had a gift of, 250, and, that's a guess. Well, how did you come up with 250? Well, that was round trip, from Silver Airways, down there and back, or whatever it may be. So that's how you would value transportation if it's airfare. It'd be mileage if, you're in a vehicle. Okay, I mentioned this before. Form 9 is a quarterly gift disclosure, so you do that for gifts that are valued more than $100. You don't have to worry about relatives because that's not a gift, and you don't have to file it at all if you don't have any gifts. I've got a couple of these opinions that I found that are helpful. Don't know if y'all will ever get into a situation like this, but it's nice to know what the Ethics Commission said. So here's Travel by a Mayor. He was asking the Ethics Commission about if he travels to a conference or event and it's paid by somebody else, but again, it's for the official business, is that a gift that needs to be reported? And the Commission said, yes, it is, because they're paying it, for your travel. But they did indicate when it would not be a gift to you, and that would be if the agency pays for your travel like they would ordinarily, and somebody else reimburses the agency, then they're paying the agency, and that's not a gift to you. So you may want to think about that, is if somebody who's a vendor comes to you and says, hey, we'll pick up your airfare for this, to say, no, look, don't do that. The agency's going to do it. If you want to pay the sheriff's office, that's okay. You can look at that ethics opinion, and that's the authority for that. Okay, and here's one. This is about legal services that were provided to the city. This was a city that was going to file a lawsuit. They wanted to have an ordinance, and they wanted to challenge the preemption statute with regard to firearms, 790-33. And so one of these organizations that, probably favor, gun restrictions and the like, offered to take care of the legal services. And because the city commissioner was going to be named in the lawsuit, but only in his official capacity, that wasn't a gift to the commissioner. Obviously, if there's a lawsuit and you're named and somebody's going to offer to pick up legal services for that, that's a gift, for your benefit. So that's the distinction. Okay, I've got some of these scenarios, and we're going to go through these. These are some examples relating to what we've discussed with regard to gifts. We'll take about 10 minutes to go through these and then have about 10 minutes for questions. So here's the first one, and this is alluding to what we talked earlier when we discussed, you and your wife going out for dinner. So Sheriff and his wife are treated to dinner by friends. Their meals total $120 without the tip. By the way, you do not include the tip in valuing the meal. So what's the story here? Do we have a gift? Well, yeah. The meals total $120. That's more than $100. So that's a gift that would need to be reported. So, based upon what we've discussed, if you pay your friends $20 or more, then there's no requirement to report the gift. Otherwise, you're going to report a gift of $120. Now, we've just talked about the spouse, but they take you and the family out, and you're the one that normally pays for the kids, then we're not talking about $120 that the other family members are there, and it's like $200. Now we're up to $200. So think about, ordinarily, what would you normally pay for? Well, you'd pay for the spouse, you'd pay for the kids. So somebody else picks up that tab, that's a gift to you, that's a benefit to you. All right, next slide. Okay, so a sheriff and his wife are treated at dinner by a vendor. Remember, that's somebody who's got a contract with your agency. The meals total $120 without the tip. All right, well, right now, it's a vendor, so you cannot accept that gift. You have to pay that down. You can either reimburse them for the entire meal, or you can get them to under to 100 or less, and you got 90 days to do it. So when you do that, there's no reporting requirement. There never was, because again, we're talking about a vendor or somebody like a lobbyist for whom you can't receive a gift. So think about, does this person have a relationship with your sheriff's office? If that's the case, then you need to ask the question, hey, really appreciate the meal. How much was it? And the vendor says, hey, don't worry about it. Worry about it. Okay, worry about it. You're out to dinner in your county and somebody sees you, you never know. So better ask the question, write the check, and then you don't have to worry about it. Okay. I've used this scenario in the past, and it's, again, a good one for a reminder because it's football season, and there are lots of folks out there that would like to buy you football tickets, or they may have a skybox, and yeah, please come up and watch the game in the skybox. Well, that's got a twist to it, so let's talk about the twist. Let's assume that the cost of the tickets are $50 each. That'd be a deal, by the way, but okay. $50 each for the tickets. But now you're in the skybox. So you're thinking, okay, the value of the ticket's $50, no worries, I'm good. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because the skybox is not necessarily for the benefit of the donor here, but it's really for entertainment purposes for clients. So you need to ask a couple of questions. You need to find out, what did the skybox cost the donor annually? And I give you for instance, so the skybox costs $20,000 annually. Then the question is, how many does it seat? All right, 20. So you divide the 20 into 20,000. And then look at the home games, and you come up with an additional cost prorating the skybox of $100. So now you've got 100 added to that 50, and you've got a gift of $150 that you either need to report or pay it down. Okay, this is a charity golf tournament. Some of y'all play golf, and there are charity golf tournaments, and they say, please come out, Sheriff, it'd be great. I'd love to have you out here. Okay. Well, ask the question, okay, what is the public paying for this to be in the tournament? So, yeah, it's $125, Sheriff, but don't worry about it. We're happy to have you. Well, that's a gift. The public's paying $125. You're not. That's a gift. So pay them $125, say, hey, I'll contribute to the charity, okay? That's great. Now we don't have any worries. Or I'll pay you part of it, But think about that round of golf of $125. They picked up what the public is ordinarily paying. That's a gift. Okay, you get a rifle. And after you get the rifle, which is worth $300, you decide, hey, really appreciate it. It's, from one of your admirers in public. Maybe it's the service club. They really appreciate everything that you've done. They love what the agency is doing. Y'all are innovative, great programs, and great leadership, Sheriff. Here's this rifle, and it's worth $300. You decide, okay, I'm going to give it to the youth ranches. Well, they gave it to you, and you decided later you would give it to the youth ranches that's a gift that you need to report. Now, that may not be an issue for you, to report that and indicate, yeah, I got it as a gift, but I gave it to the youth branches, and, maybe you put that on your Form 9, and that may be something you want the world to see. That's okay. But if you get a rifle and you don't want to report it, or it's some other tangible item, the way to avoid reporting it is to say, I'm accepting it on behalf of the youth branches. They can raffle it off, and it'll be good for them. And then, what I would do is I'd send them a letter afterwards and saying, thank you so much for the rifle, which I have accepted on behalf of the youth branches. So, you've got a record on that in case there's ever any question. You take it on behalf of the youth branches, it's fine. If you take it and then later you decide to give it to the youth branches, that's still a gift for you. That needs to be reported. Okay, so here's the best friend scenario we talked about before. You go to the lodge, you stay for 5 days, meals are provided, 4 others attend. That's $44 a day, folks, okay? Again, no best friend exception, 5 days at $44 a day. If there are meals and somebody's picking up the tab for the meals, they divide that by 6, and you travel with a friend, split mileage. Okay, actually had this scenario come up, and it did involve a sheriff, and the twist in these facts was that the lodge where the sheriff stayed was actually rental property. And we're going to say that the value of the rental property was $150 a night. Well, if the sheriff reports $44 a night, that is inaccurate because it's rental property. And so that's a question you need to find out. Hey, this is really, really beautiful. Do y'all ever rent it out? Yeah, we do. Okay, well, what do you rent it for? $150 a night. Okay, so that's the value. It's $150 for, 4 or 5 nights. Okay, we changed the facts. It's the brother-in-law, no worries, because the brother-in-law is a relative. That's easy. That's the relative exception. It's not a gift. Let's talk about a round of golf. All right, we talked about the charity golf tournament, and we said, okay, if the public's got to pay, $125, you have a gift. But what if somebody treats you to a round of golf? Now, let's say the green fee is ordinarily $75. The memberships for this vendor is $750. Does this mean you need to take the membership fee into consideration? And the answer is no, because the member's fee is for the member's benefit. He just happens to be taking you out for a round of golf. As long as that round of golf is 100 or less, it's not a problem. Okay, this is a good one because it gives us a couple of issues to talk about, and it touches on something we're going to discuss a little more next week. So here's Ace Communications, and they're building on a contract for your radios, and national championship is coming up, and I hope my football team is in it. And CEO provides transportation for the sheriff in his private plane and tickets to the national championship. Okay, that's a given. All right, so you travel in the private plane, that's a gift. So how do you value it? Again, you look at what's the commercial airfare for Coach. Okay, what's the face value of the tickets? You want to see what those tickets are, and that's a gift as well as, the airfare. But the other thing that you want to be thinking about, the key here was, remember, they're bidding on a contract. They're not a vendor. If it was a vendor, you couldn't accept a gift over more than 100. You'd have to pay that down. But they're bidding on a contract. So the thing is here, there are other provisions about, somebody giving you a gift that could possibly influence, your decision to award the contract, and quite frankly, it may not be worth it, So if they've got a pending bid, and you know they're up for that award. Just say no, it's not worth it. Okay. All right, so you're going to go view jail facilities of a privately owned company. You're thinking, okay, maybe there are other options here. And the round fare ticket's $300. You got a hotel room of $250, $150 for meals. You look at the whole thing. You value the whole package in deciding what's the amount of the gift. That's the purpose of that particular scenario. It's everything put together. That's a gift. Doesn't matter if it's for official purposes. They picked up your tab, therefore that is a gift to you. And the last one that we've got, there's a raffle initiated by a vendor for the benefit of the youth branches. This is similar to what we talked about before. Sheriff gets a complimentary fishing trip worth $150. That's a gift. It's not from the FSA. It's a pass-through from the vendor. That needs to be paid down. If that's a vendor with you, they have a contract with you, then you can't accept it unless you pay it down so where it's 100 or less. If it's a vendor and they're just sponsoring, you know, for the sheriff's conference and they don't have a contract with you, then you can accept the fishing trip. You just have to report it as a gift, a fishing trip of $150. Or again, you can pay the vendor $50 or more and then not have to worry about it. So that's it for this part of ethics, and I'll take questions. And if it's something, you know, we want to talk about it afterwards and, you know, it's something that doesn't necessarily need to be shared, then, you know, you can always call me after the presentation and we can kick it around. So what questions have y'all got about ethics that we've talked about today?
Yeah, all the lines are unmuted. If you have any questions, you can just ask. No questions.
No questions? Y'all are experts. Okay, well again, something comes up, you know where to find me, and again, I encourage the calls, so I'm happy to help. So if you enjoyed this week, you're going to love next week because it's pretty much more of the same. I do have some fact situations, as we did here, that we'll kind of pull it together, but again, next week we're going to talk about a different part of the ethics code and get into misuse of office and the potential for conflict with, you know, employment relationships and the like with family members and any business interests that you may have. And we'll also talk about nepotism. So anything comes up between now and next week, give me a call. Thank y'all.
Hey, Wayne. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's Rick Bradshaw.
Hey, how are you, Sheriff?
I'm good. What about campaign contributions from vendors? That's not an issue?
I don't think so. I don't. Again, as long as it's going to the campaign account, I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah, I didn't think so either. I just wanted to double check that.
I don't know of any prohibition. I know of a prohibition with regard to gifts, but not with regard to campaign.
Okay, perfect. Good job, man.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Any other questions? Okay. That's it for today. We'll see you next week, same time.
Thanks, Wayne.